Welcome back for another update of Marcelina, our Reliance 44 sailboat. I want to start this update with a nod to a supplier of fiberglass. I made a mistake of ordering the wrong cloth from fiberglasssite.com, but when I contacted them, they immediately corrected the problem and got me the right cloth right away. They seem to have the best prices and definitely have great service. That's something I can really appreciate. When we left off last time, I was in the process of relocating the main cabin bulkheads about a foot aft to increase the length of the settees and thus make proper sea berths. Since then, with my wife's help, I've finished tabbing the bulkheads to the hull. Also, we talked last time about salvaging the existing flooring. Unfortunately, their restoration work to repair the existing teak and holly turned out to be pretty extensive. So instead, because we already have plenty of maple, we decided to purchase some walnut and use the maple as an accent stripe for new floors. My cabinet maker is working on these floors as we speak. Before setting the cabinet maker loose on the rest of the interior, I decided to do one last detailed check of the moisture levels of the hull. To my surprise and disappointment, my meter registered elevated levels over a fairly large area on the starboard side. So I marked off the areas and removed a large vertical section of the interior skin at one end of the marked area. The idea being that I would just use a small section in order to prevent the boat from deforming as it sits on the cradle. If I were to remove a larger section of the inner fiberglass skin, it would potentially deform and create a problem. I was amazed that the core that was actually removed was perfectly dry. But since I had the skin off, I replaced the core anyway and then resecured the inner fiberglass to the boat. Because I was working on a vertical surface, I needed a way to keep the skin in place while the epoxy set. Stealing an idea I got from another YouTube video, I used a plastic sheet and pulled a vacuum over the area for about 2 hours so that the epoxy set up and the whole area was nice and secure. After doing some research and discovering that using a moisture meter on the hull is not as straightforward as it may seem, I decided to take core samples before continuing. I took one larger core sample in the center of the area thought to be wet, and yes, in fact it was wet. Then I drilled 1/4-inch holes around that area until I got to dry coring. The area that I ended up replacing was quite a bit smaller than I had originally feared. I replaced the area that was wet and again used the vacuum trick to secure the core and the inner fiberglass layer. During the process of replacing some of the hull core, I also removed one of the through hulls. This through hull was used for discharging the holding tank at sea, and since I'm going to be using a composting toilet, it won't be necessary. I am, however, repurposing one of the other through hulls just below the rail for use as an auxiliary bilge pump outlet. The boat came with 2 electric bilge pumps, one automatic, that is, it has a float switch, and the other operated by a switch on the electric panel. Thinking that these pumps were a bit small in size for this boat, I bought another higher output pump. But instead of putting one of the pumps on a shelf as a spare and hoping that it's not an emergency when it needs to be pressed into service, I decided to use all 3 as functioning pumps. Now the bilge is too narrow for all 3 pumps to sit securely on the bottom, so I made a little shelf out of the old stainless steel stovetop, and that shelf sits over the top of the other 2 pumps. So the 3rd pump will just sit on the shelf, waiting for the water to rise. That way, if the water does rise, I'll have that much more pumping capacity. And yes, if all else fails, I do have a manual bilge pump. In this photo of the underside of the transmission, I discovered that the cooling manifold was corroded and that the vibration coupling for the drive shaft was cracked. The cooling manifold was removed and the marina cleaned it up and repaired the corrosion damage and replaced the gaskets. Then they primed and painted it. I kind of like the red paint. I've also ordered a new drive coupling to replace the one that's cracked. Still to go on the inside before the cabinets start going in is some additional wiring, but otherwise the next update should include the interior starting to take shape. I hope you join me so you can follow the progress. Thanks for watching.